Hello, everyone. This is Toby again with Chariots of Fire Ministries. Hope you're doing great. And we're talking about the significance of the near future today for Israel and for the world, especially for the year 2021. And there's a very interesting prophecy in the very first book of Enoch about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And this is what I wanted to look at today. And Enoch touches on God, talking about the entire history of Israel in a long, drawn out, a prophetic dream that's over 5 chapters. And in that context, it talks about Israel having 70 shepherds at a certain period of time, certain rulers, kings, princes, governors, or today we call them prime ministers. And when we go to 1st Enoch chapter 89, it talks about how first Israel got started out with the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're identified with 3 different colored bulls. Then we see Moses described as a sheep. And then we see the 3 kings, Saul, David, and Solomon. And then the scene switches and it talks about a time of apostasy where people have a lot of problems with division, where there's rivalry. And those days really started towards the end of the reign of King Solomon. And right after he died, the kingdom fell apart in the northern and the southern kingdom. So this is really where this all starts out. And first Enoch chapter 90, right there in verses 1 and following, it talks about that first group of 35 shepherds. We're having a total here of 3 groups. The first group is 35 shepherds. And as I understand it, that starts with King Solomon and goes all the way to the time of where both of the divided kingdoms get attacked, the north by the Assyrians and the south by the Babylonians. And then we have the next group, and that next group ranges from the kings that are during the time of the Babylonians and Assyrians invading Israel and Judah, and it goes all the way to the end of the period of time when Jesus was crucified, and there was another royal house called the Hasmoneans. That's where the Herodians come from. Herod the Great, who was the king at the birth of Jesus, and then later we have Herod Antipas, who was the king at the time of the crucifixion, and we have 2 other kings by the name of Herod mentioned in the book of Acts. Those are part of the second group of 23 shepherds, but the most interesting part about this prophecy really is that final group, and I want to read directly from 1st Enoch chapter 90 verses 17 and 18. It says there, "I saw that man who wrote the book according to the commandment of the Lord, till he opened that book concerning the destruction which those 12 last shepherds would bring about, and showed that they would bring destruction more than their predecessors before the Lord of the sheep. And I saw till the Lord of the sheep came unto them, and took in his hand the staff of his wrath, smote the earth, and the earth clave asunder, and all the beasts and all the birds of the heaven fell from among those sheep, and were swallowed up in the earth, and it covered them." So in other words, we have 12 shepherds, 12 rulers of Israel, and Israel didn't have rulers for almost 1900 years. But at the foundation, at the inauguration of the State of Israel in 1948, Israel started having kings and shepherds again. They called them prime ministers. They started with David Ben-Gurion. He's the first of this last group of 12. And let me just dwell a little bit on this verse 18. It says there that they would rule until the time that God would stretched forth the staff of his wrath and smote the earth. And to me, in my understanding, this speaks of the time of the Great Tribulation. This speaks of the time of the judgment of the earth, what we would call the end of times. And it affects all of creation, the beasts, the birds, man, Also, the sheep here, and the sheep in that whole context is, of course, Israel, the nation of Israel. So, interestingly, Enoch talks about those 12 shepherds, those 12 prime ministers, as you wish, to be in power before the end would come. So, if we start with David Ben-Gurion in 1948, and we go all the way to the present day, we see today we have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He first became Prime Minister in 1996, then he had one full term until 1999, and then was interrupted by three other Prime Ministers, Barak, Sharon, and Olmert, only to become Prime Minister again in 2009 until the present day. And he really is, when you count it, he is the 12th of the 12, and he is the 70th of the 70th of the 70 that Enoch is describing, that is tending Israel. So either he or one of the other prime ministers that are still alive, and currently that's only Ehud Barak or Ehud Olmert, will be in charge at the time of the end, at the time when Jesus will come back, at the time when the great judgments of the book of Revelation will be unleashed on the face of the earth. And in my understanding, this points to a very soon return of our Lord. There have been several attempts to implement ancient recommendations about another aspect of Jewish history, and that is the Sanhedrin. And the latest attempt was in 2004 when Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz and a group of other rabbis founded a new Sanhedrin in Tiberias at the Sea of Galilee. That's where the last Sanhedrin in the time of the 2nd century was disbanded. And they claim that they followed all the proposals and rules of the ancient rabbis. One of the main objectives of this newly formed court is the reestablishing of a Jewish temple in Jerusalem as the heartpiece of Judaism. And at present day, the Temple Institute, in connection with the Sanhedrin, have managed to train numerous devout Jews that have a DNA-verified lineage from the tribe of Levi and from Aaron, the first high priest. And they are trained right now as we speak in many practical aspects of the temple service. And they have also gathered millions of dollars in donations from Jewry across the world and managed to build all the furniture that will be needed in a future temple, including a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. So one thing that has been holding up the construction until now is the Muslim authority over the Temple Mount and the lack of clarity where exactly the temple would need to be built. Those questions will be resolved, I believe personally, under the strong leadership of President Donald Trump, his emissaries to the Near East. And even more important is the final ingredient that is needed to inaugurate the temple, which also gives us a very interesting aspect of timing. And that is the mysterious red heifer. So Moses instructed us in the Torah, that is in the book of Numbers, that a red female heifer in which there is no defect and on which a yoke had never come should be used for purification of the sanctuary, priests, and furniture. So the Jewish oral law describes that without defect means that the young cow cannot have more than 2 black hairs. It must be of perfect health. So it continues that only 9 red heifers have actually been slaughtered since the time of Moses until now. So we have Moses, who slaughtered the first red heifer around 1500 BCE. Then we have Ezra, the reformer Ezra, around 450 BCE. Then we have Yohanan, the high priest, and Simon the Just, the first one in 400 BCE and the second one around 300 BCE, having 2 red heifers each during the time of their office as high priests. Then we have Elionai and Hanamiel, the Egyptian. We have Yishmael bin Piavi, who slaughtered the 9th red heifer in around 15 Common Era. So the Jewish Rabbi Maimonides comments on this part of the Mishnah that it will be the king Messiah who will prepare the 10th heifer. And of course, the number 10 is the number of completion. There are 10 commandments. There are 10 virgins in Matthew 25. So with this amazing statement, Maimonides recounts an ancient tradition that the 10th red heifer is associated with the Messianic era. Therefore, many Jews have been waiting for almost 2,000 years without a qualified heifer being born in Israel. This was true, and this was a tragedy for them because they felt rejected by God. But now that new Sanhedrin that I talked about earlier started a red heifer breeding program in July 2015. They introduced the Red Angus breed to Israel and made an announcement that on August the 28th, 2018, a perfect female has been born that was declared qualified by a board of rabbis within a week's notice. Another portion of the Mishnah declares that the heifer has to be anywhere from 2 to 5 years old in order to qualify for the sacrifice and the purification. So if we were to assume that this heifer that has been nominated will be the one used to cleanse the temple, the Levites, and the furniture according to rabbinic understanding, then the time frame for the inauguration of the third temple would be anywhere between the fall of 2020 and the fall of 2023. Most likely, the ceremony will be done once the heifer is 3 years old, as the Old Testament stresses the fact that the 3-year-old heifer is the ideal sacrificial animal. For example, when we check that in Genesis 15 verse 9 or Isaiah 15 verse 5. And so the year 2021, when this little cow will be 3 years old, will be very significant in spiritual terms. And I personally believe also that either Benjamin Netanyahu or one of the other 2 remaining 12 shepherds will be in charge of Israel at the time, and that shortly after that we can expect Jesus to return back to come for his bride. Thank you so much for listening. Be very blessed. I hope I've stirred up some thoughts and questions. If you want to leave some comments, be happy to answer as much as I can. And see you all and hear you all shortly.